Hi guys, today we're looking at chapter 7, which deals with multifactorial traits. And we're going to begin with sections 1 and 2. Section 1 is really short, it's genes in the environment mode traits. And section 2 is polygenic traits are continuously varying. All right, so what do you guys say we get started, huh? All right, so genes and the environment mode are traits. Polygenic traits are determined by more than one gene. So poly meaning multiple, gene meaning gene, so multiple genes. And each gene will provide a small additive effect, meaning that when you have different combinations of alleles, you see different gradients of the expression. And we're going to show you some examples of that in a little bit, but just for now, some examples are height, skin color, etc. Multifactorial traits are determined by interactions between one or more genes and the environment. So these have an environmental components to them, something in the environment that affects the expression. Now, typically multifactorial traits are also polygenic, but they tend to be polygenic with an environmental component. Because of the multitude of things that go into them, the different gene interactions plus the environmental interactions, they definitely do not exhibit Mendelian ratios. And pure polygenic traits, meaning absolutely no environmental influence, are very, very, very rare. A lot of our traits actually do have some kind of environmental factor that will affect their expression if they are polygenic. So most of our traits that are polygenic are also multifactorial. And because of that, a lot of times we will use polygenic and multifactorial as interchangeable terms, just simply because pure polygenic are very rare, although eye color is an example of that. Polygenic traits are continuously varying. So what we mean by this is, remember we said that each gene will provide a small additive effect to the greater phenotype. And different allele combinations of all of these genes will create different varying degrees. So what we tend to see is more of a continuum of phenotypes, as opposed to ones that we saw like, oh, what's a good example? We'll give the one at the bottom here. The widow's peak. So your hairline, either you have the widow's peak or you don't. You have the flat hairline. Either you have the straight thumb, or if it bends further back, you have the hitchhiker's thumb. It's either this or that. So because of that, it is discontinuous. But if you look here at skin color in the graph of it, you'll notice that we have more than just this or that. We have all the way from albino to extremely dark skin, and we have this entire range of different levels of pigmentation in between. So that's what we mean by continuous. Individual genes of a polygenic trait will follow Mendelian's laws. So if you're looking at just one of the genes, it would follow Mendelian ratios and all that. But since they all work together to produce additive effects for one larger phenotype, as a whole, when you look at all of the genes together, we do not see that additive effect. In fact, instead, we see a bell-shaped curve type of effect. So you notice how it starts off very few outliers on the pale end. Then as we get more to mid-range, we see a lot more individuals. And then fewer as we get to the extremely dark end. So we end up seeing this bell-shaped curve, which we do have a additional resource video. The link to it will be at the end of this entire chapter, but it actually goes and does a tri-hybrid Punnett square, and then we'll graph it out and you'll see the bell-shaped curve. Fingerprint patterns. Fingerprints are actually kind of interesting. So we have this thing called dramatic glyphics, and this is the technique that is used to actually compare fingerprint patterns and identify and distinguish individuals. So your fingerprints are actually multifactorial. There are multiple genes as well as environmental factors that will affect how your fingerprints come out. Now, yes, you and some other person may have the same shape on your right index finger, but you may not have the same ridge count. We'll talk about that in a moment. But not only that, it's unlikely that all 10 of your fingers will have the exact same shape and the exact same ridge count. That's why fingerprints are very unique and how you can use them to tell one person from another. Even identical twins do not have the same fingerprints. They have different fingerprints. They're very, very similar to each other because they share the same genetic foundation, genetic blueprint, because identical twins. But there actually is the environmental factor that changes it slightly between the two. And that factor is mom's body heat during pregnancy or gestation. So as the twins are sitting on different sides of the uterus and they push against the uterine wall, depending on where they push, there may be more or less body heat given off at that particular spot. And that body heat of mom's can actually affect the development of the fingerprints. So you do tend to see identical twins who have similar fingerprints, but they're still going to be different enough that you can tell them apart. Now at the bottom, we have the three main types of fingerprints. There's subcategories of these, but here it just kind of goes up and over. That's the arch. When it kind of swoops up and back, that's a loop. And when you have these circles that kind of begins as circles and then kind of loops around it, those are whorls. Now you heard me mention ridge type. That's the amount of actual ridges, the little skin bumps that make up your fingerprint between the center of a structure and what we call the triradius. Now if you look here at the loop, you notice how it's kind of formed like this little triangle here, the 3-point area. That's the triradius. Now the ridge count is when you count from the triradius the number of lines to the center of the loop. And if we were to count those lines, we would get 13. Not all loops have 13. Some may have 5, some might have 23. And that's why we can get such a wide variation. Now with the whorl, there's 2 triradii. There's usually one that's closer and one that's farther. And you'll count both of those. So the one on the left, there's a ridge count of 17 to this triradius, and this one has a ridge count of 8. Arch does not have any triradius, so you don't have to count that. Human height and eye color. The human height in a population varies continuously in the bell-shaped distribution. So what that means is human height actually is a multifactorial trait. There are different genes that affect it as well as environmental factors. Diet and health are strong environmental factors in expressing genetic potential for height. So what that means is if you have genes to be tall, but for whatever reason you're malnourished or you get sick very early in life and a serious illness, you may never grow tall, even though your genes say you should be tall because of these other effects. The poor diet, the malnutrition, not getting enough protein or minerals and vitamins, or a serious illness stunting your growth. Your genes say one thing, but you end up being very short because of these environmental effects. Also, on the other hand, if you have short genes, but you have a healthy diet and lifestyle, then you'll be on the taller end of your range. Because if you notice, we always talk about height in terms of ranges. So you'll be on the taller end of that shorter spectrum. And to show you the height, or the bell-shaped curve of height, the picture at the bottom, this was taken at a school. This picture is also in your textbook. And it shows the bell-shaped curve. So we have super duper short on one side, super duper tall on the other, and we can see how it makes this continuously varying shape. Eye color, we do believe at this point in time that it is pretty much our only true polygenic trait. Like we said, polygenic traits are rare because a lot of them either aren't polygenic, meaning maybe only one gene, or there's an environmental influence. We have not really found any kind of environmental component that has a good effect on our eye color. What we have found though is that there are two genes that control your eye color. So it is the bare minimum of the definition of a polygenic trait. And each one has two alleles, and they can interact additively to produce the 5 human eye colors. Now, the 5 main human eye colors are brown, blue, green, hazel, and gray. So it's a different allele combinations between these two genes that will lead to these 5 different colors. All right, and then skin color. Differences in skin color arise from the quantity and distribution of the pigment melanin in the uppermost layer of skin cells. So what happens is your skin cells are producing a certain pigment called melanin, and different people have or produce different amounts of melanin, and it's based on exposure to sunlight. That is the environmental factor. Now, it is also in our genes. 2 people with dark skin are likely to have a dark-skinned child. 2 people with light skin are likely to have a light-skinned child. And that has to do mostly with the evolutionary basis for why there are different amounts of melanin. And it has to do with where your ancestors hail from and how much sunlight they were exposed to, which I will get to that when we look at the world map. But you today can also have very, very slight changes to your melanin production. For instance, I'm pretty darn pale. Like my stomach, which never, ever, ever sees the light of day, is like pasty white. It really is. But my arms, my face, they tend to be a little bit darker, just naturally at this point. And that's just because, you know, years of being outside in the sun and in the summer wearing short sleeves or tank tops, and that constant exposure, it has trained the cells in certain parts of my body to create a little bit more melanin than other parts. So like my stomach doesn't really produce, the skin on my stomach doesn't really produce much in the way of melanin. But my arms, since they've been trained due to constant exposure to the sun, even in the middle of winter, they still tend to be slightly darker than my stomach. They have like just a little bit more of an olive color because they naturally make more melanin due to the constant exposure to sunlight. So I have parts of my body that, because of the environmental influence, have changed the amount of melanin they produce and have thus changed the skin tone on those different areas. From a genetic perspective, allele frequencies are the best indicator of shared heritage in a population. Skin color alone does not effectively indicate a person's ethnic and genetic background. Because like we said, there's a lot of different things that affect your skin color, not just your genes, but your environmental factors as well. And as a result, yes, I'm going to rant a little bit. This is why I turn the comments off. To me, it is dumb that we are judging other people based on how much melanin is produced in their skin, i.e. skin color. When you have people of the same race that can have different skin tones, and people of different races that can have similar skin tones. There is no actual genetic basis for race. Race is just what we call it when you want to identify a separate group of people for whatever silly reason, typically based on the amount of melanin production. But honestly, I think that's dumb. If you want to know like someone's genetic ancestry, it's better to look at shared alleles and the frequency of alleles, because that's going to be a better indicator. Anyways, let's check out the world map. So why is it that some groups of people have darker skin than others? Well, like I said, it's based on where their ancestors hailed from. This map shows you where darker skin tones are typically found, people of which backgrounds. Well, if you notice, darker skin tones tend to be closer to the equator. There's a lot of sun at the equator. And that's actually all that it boils down to, is people and tribes and our ancestors that were closer to the equator had a lot more direct sunlight exposure or exposed to them. So over, many generations, their skin naturally started producing higher amounts of melanin in order to protect themselves from the UV rays of the sun. So all it is an evolutionary defense to protect the body from harmful radiation. As you get farther away from the equator, look at what happens. You get lighter skin tones. Lighter skin tones are found farther away from the equator. Let's look at up here for a moment, because these are where the lightest ones are. Oh, that's no data. Fine. Right there. That's the lightest ones right there. The reason for that being is those are areas that get inconsistent sunlight. During certain months, they get more sunlight, but then there are areas where they will have, very, very little sunlight each day. Okay, wait a minute, dude. Where they have very, very little sunlight each day. And instead of being more direct, because of the tilt of the earth, the sun rays actually come in at an angle. Give me a moment. Sorry, my ripply butt. I love puppers. So they have less melanin, leading to lighter skin tones. And that's because since there was less sun exposure, they needed more sunlight to be absorbed into their skin in order to activate the vitamin D and things like that. So it encouraged more light to be absorbed, as opposed to those who hail from the equator regions where there was too much light and they had to block some of it out to keep them safe. It's also a nice little social media post that I found using this exact same map, and pretty much just saying how it's natural selection that leads to different colors of skin. And actually what's believed is that most populations began with darker pigmentations, and then as the tribes moved further away, then natural selection led to paler skin tones. So yeah, there's that. All right, so that's my rant for today. And that is all of sections 1 and 2. So I hope this was educational for you guys. I hope it helped to clear up some things, helped you understand it. So if you have questions, hit me up in our Google Classroom or through email. And in the meantime, you guys, stay awesome, stay curious, and most importantly, stay safe and healthy. All right, you guys, take care. Bye-bye.